We'll introduce the episode and we will get started. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks once again for joining us here at Pastor's Positive Mental Health Institute. I'm so excited to always interview just wonderful guests, and yet we have another one with us. So if you like the content here, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you have any questions, the contact information is in the comments. Feel free to reach out to me. And if there's subjects that you would like me to cover, please feel free also to reach out to that. So let's get going with Pastor Robert Portier from Bossier City. Did I say all those right? I think, or close
Yes,
enough,
you
right?
did.
In Louisiana. And so I had the pleasure of meeting Pastor Robert last October. I was doing a conference out in Louisiana, and had the wonderful job of chauffeuring me and another gentleman who were there. And so he was stuck with a captive audience for in a car for a little while, but just really appreciated all that he had to share, his life experience, and I really look forward to him sharing that with you. So, Robert, before we get too far into some of the church aspect, I'd like to know kind of what led you into the ministry.
So, do you want the 5-minute version or the 2-hour version?
How about somewhere in between? No.
Yeah. Well, I would say it started being raised in a home that was very religious, a Roman Catholic on the Gulf Coast. Uh, my father was in the military, so we moved a lot. Um, and I've shifted from Roman Catholic to Lutheran after my mother died, and my father married a Lutheran, so we went to the Lutheran church. Not as different as some people may think. Uh, the Church Catholic and Lutheranism, of course, comes out of the uh, Roman Latin. That's our background, right? So historically speaking, they would be similar in a lot of ways. I I pretty much figured the Navy worked for Dad, so I'll do the same thing myself. And I was confirmed Missouri Lutheran in Houma, Louisiana at Grace Lutheran Church, just as I was entering first year high school. Um, and once I confirmed, I was kind of like most other youngsters, I guess. Okay, I graduated from church. I
Yeah.
still went to church. I actually always enjoyed going to church. I've always felt better when I left, uh, and that is, I always have had that connection uh, with my faith, and so I uh, I guess I started sitting in the pews in my early 20s, seeing what the pastor was doing and thinking I could do that, you know, um, and. Uh, a number of things in my youth kind of had me thinking that I might could do that. And when you're in the military, you're just taking 20 years to figure out what you're going to do when you grow up. um, I so I kind of started taking my faith seriously in my mid 20s. San Diego, California. I read the Bible cover to cover for the first time. Um, this led to a clash between my old Earth evolutionary beliefs and my young Earth biblical beliefs. Um, yeah, so I did a lot of research scientifically to kind of bring those two in harmony to find out that there's just as much good science that speaks to a young Earth as an old Earth. So I'll take the one that is in keeping with my faith. Um, and I also discovered a love of teaching while I was in San Diego in the 80s. Uh, so I love this topic of creation and evolution. I love teaching, and I figured that to do those two things, probably the best job to get into would be something like a pastor. So I felt called into the ministry, I would say, in the late 80s. But I also uh, decided to finish the naval career first, so I'd have something to live on while I went to school for 4 years to learn how to be a pastor. Um, so that's why I felt called into the ministry and how I kind of got there. So there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. So you finished your naval career, and then did you go directly to seminary right after that?
I retired in 2000. I My oldest was halfway through high school, so we let her finish high school there, and then I went to Fort Wayne in '02. I left there in '06 as a convertible vicar, And then I went to Tennessee for almost 17 years.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So right now, tell me about your current church, your role, and just anything you want to share about your church.
So, how I got where I am is connected to where I came from. So I was at St. Paul Lutheran Church in Sevierville, Tennessee, where I was my first pastorate. And about 10 years into my time there, I wrote a letter to my district president saying, it takes me 2 days to drive to visit family, and we love East Tennessee. How could you not love East Tennessee? But all my family's on the Gulf Coast. And of course, my wife's family is in Bavaria, but there's no calls in Bavaria for Missouri Synod pastors.
It's a longer drive too.
Except for maybe Kaiserslautern. I think we have one guy there. But
Wow.
anyway, and after interviewing for a few positions, I was interviewed for this position here in Bossier City. Um, for those who don't know, Bossier City is kind of the bootstrap of the boot of Louisiana, where Shreveport is as well, and it's also where Barksdale Air Force Base is. So I thought that as I interviewed for this position, it seemed very clear to me that my years of experience in a senior pastor position might be helpful. They had just gone through 7 years of short pastorates after a 48-year pastorate. So I thought I could bring some stabilization in uh, my last full-time pastoring position. I plan on retiring in 3 to 5 years, but I don't plan on going anywhere. I'm going to live wherever my grandkids are. So if they're here, that's where I'm going to live.
Nice.
um, you kind of have that, you have that freedom a little bit after doing two careers in essence.
Hmm.
Um, I so they issued me the call and I accepted the call, and I have for the past 2 years kind of helped them and myself. I've acclimated myself. I've visited with about 80% of the congregation. I'm guessing that's the only ones who want to have me visit them. So I feel like I have a full understanding of who this group of people are and the community we've been called to serve. They had a Mother's Day Out program, sort of preschool, for about 40 years. It shut down a year or so before I got here. Um, so we went through, you may have heard of it before, something called Compass and Car, where they came and helped us kind of evaluate everything, our plant, our method of doing business and everything. We pulled out of that some good things. We're probably going to do a couple of things this fall, something to do with stewardship. We already had something in place, but a focus on stewardship with a few things, a focus on evangelism with a few things. The rest of it is really the work of an exploratory committee that we had come together shortly after I got here. And they were the ones who we requested the Compass and Car study. And now that they have that information, their primary goal was to determine if this is a good location, if we are the right congregation to start a regular, either a pre-K through 8 or a preschool or something. We have a 5-acre campus on a very well-trafficked area of town that's very populated. So we're in the process. I'm in the process now getting reaching out to our Church Extension Fund and the Lutheran Church Extension Fund, get some estimates on the cost of basically market studies and those sorts of things, so we can decide if we want to expend those funds. There's because of the sour taste that was left in the mouth of the congregation with closing of the preschool that we had, that there's not currently a very strong desire for such a ministry here. I see great potential, but at the same time, I am willing to. I feel that for the past 15 years as a pastor, my job has been to help people see the possibilities and let them make the decisions, while I'm doing my primary vocation, which is preaching and teaching. So all of those other, I mean, we learned in COVID, right, that basically keep the main thing the main thing. Word and sacrament ministry, everything else, while important, is secondary. And it kind of helped us take a break from the secondary that is important. And we brought a lot of those things back, and the things that weren't worth our time aren't here anymore.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, and I think I'd like you to speak a little bit about that leadership style, because I think that's very valuable. People have been in different traditions, and even we see this in the LCMS context at times. Sometimes pastors can be a little demanding, shall we say, of their
Mhm.
way. And I really like what you said, here, I'm going to give vision and options, but ultimately it's their church, right? And
Right.
so,
Well, it's
so
God's church.
what's that?
It's God's church.
Well, yeah, yeah,
It's his
right,
pride. Right, right. But
right.
I think it's difficult, and this has to do with my previous career. The most difficult thing you will learn uh, in a leadership role is delegation, uh, because you can delegate a task, but the responsibility is still yours. So when that which you've delegated fails, and so you have to set people up to succeed if you're going to succeed. So part of that reality is in a church setting is first defining what success is, and we don't define success in the church the same way that the business world defines success, right?
Right.
We define success as being faithful to our calling, and and succeeding every day in being a little less sinful, maybe, right? So and helping our people to do just that. So because of my experience and my background, I mean, I have a number have been plugged in a number of different communities and seen a lot of different things done a lot of different ways, and I have my own idea of how things should be done. But I do think, especially within our tradition, there is what am I looking for? The hair pastor sort of idea that says if the pastor says it, we do it. And well, and I defined it this way with my congregation: everything that happens behind the communion rail, that belongs to the pastor, and he's the primary decision maker there. That doesn't relieve you from the responsibility of making sure he does that job properly.
Right, right.
But it's his primary. Everything on the other side of the rail, that is primarily a decision of the congregation.
Mhm.
So when you talk casting a vision, I'm not a fan of that way of thinking, but uh, putting forth ideas, you know, substantive ideas that people can weigh the pros and cons on. Someone who has a background in that can do that, but it's hard not to invest yourself in the ideas.
Mhm.
I learned this 15, 20 years ago when I was working in the Navy, right? And when this grumpy old chief told people to do stuff, they did it. But when I was in my church as a volunteer, as an elder, whatever, we would seek to motivate people to do things, and they would ignore us.
Yeah.
So it's a whole different dynamic. You cannot expect people who are giving of their time and effort and not getting compensated for it, with dollars, to to give the same sort of attention they give to the thing that pays their mortgage and their food bill. I mean, that's a reality. So now that doesn't excuse the fact that if I was a pastor who could speak to everybody in the church and say, do me one favor. If you're not going to do it, don't volunteer. Right?
Nice. Yeah.
If you're not going to do it, it's okay. You don't have to do it. And you don't have to feel burdened that you didn't do it. God
Mhm.
has given you a vocation, and in that vocation, you get 24 hours a day just like I do. And if that 24 hours demands of you so much that you don't have extra time to give to God, then maybe he wants you to give your time to that.
Mhm.
As long as that thing is what your vocation is: father, mother, employer, employee, all those dynamics. It He doesn't want you burning 3 to 5 hours a day on TV and video games. I can assure you of that. That's not a valuable use of anyone's time.
Mhm.
But at the same time, an hour or two a day to relax is an important part of the 24-hour period, right?
Right.
So uh, we are given requirement to take one day in seven from our third commandment, but we also on a daily basis have to have, you know, periods of rest, um, periods to, I don't know about you, but I can't work on sermons after 2 or 3 in the afternoon because the day's already starting getting cloudy for me. I
Yeah.
can do a lot of brainless stuff after 2 o'clock, but the stuff that requires clear thought,
Yeah.
I have to do from eight to noon, 8 to 1. And yeah, so this probably is not the same sort of thing. I changed my relationship with food back in 2016, and I love breakfast foods, but I'm not a breakfast person. I never really liked eating breakfast. And I discovered that there was I was already kind of doing this. I just added a couple hours. I just wouldn't eat till lunchtime. Uh, and I learned that basically this daily fasting was a thing in the realm of keto.
Hmm.
And so I stopped eating before I went to bed, and I don't eat till, or usually I eat lunch around 2. So that 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 gives me some real clarity in the morning to focus on things mental. And I actually it COVID did this for me as well. It's kind of changing my office hours, if you will use such a term, because pastors really don't have office hours. And when someone says, "How come you're not in the office?" Well, I was out visiting so and so. You want me to visit you when you need to be visited? Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, there's I try to be in and around the office from around 10 to 2 on a daily basis. Um, so after 2 is when any other sorts of on the road things will happen. And before 10, I usually I get my day started with, devotions and scripture reading, and I get through my emails and stuff before I get ready to go to the office, because my kitchen table is a lot quieter and less distracted place than my office.
Yeah. 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 That's
So
great.
that change in my relationship to food, and that change in my relationship to my work schedule, uh, made things better for me.
Yeah, and you really mentioned several things there. Obviously, kind of giving it Bible ideas, but getting it to into the place in the hands of people who are actually
Right.
gifted in those ideas. And then this idea of work-life balance is really important, and health, as far as physical health. I was at a conference in February, and I went to one session with Dr. Greg Walton from Grace Place Wellness, and
Mhm.
he gave a stat that 76% of LCMS pastors and church workers are considered obese. And
Mhm.
I'm like 76%. So I've been trying to, have a better relationship with food and for my health too. I didn't need, it was just confirmation. Okay, get serious about this. But it's
Yeah.
one of those things where it's really important for your mental health too, is you got proper rest, proper diet, you feel
Yeah.
well physically. And that's really important. And so as you give
Right.
these ideas to church members and whatnot, kind of tell me that whole process of how you rely on church members then, with some of those thoughts, or maybe even everyday
Yeah.
church functions, if you could.
Well, uh, I lean really heavily on we have, the law and the gospel. So we got the 10 Commandments, tells us how to be nice to each other. And then we have as a church body, I often say we're kind of bipolar. We have ecclesial supervision with congregational polity,
Right.
right? And
Yeah.
those two things will never be in complete harmony,
Mhm.
right? Because the sinful old Adam doesn't like what the supervisor says. He says, "I'm congregational in my way of doing things."
Mhm.
Uh, the and if you're going to the other way around, well, I don't like the decision of this group, so I'm in charge, right? So
Yeah.
that's so that will always be a tension that we have to acknowledge. But I think, just like I talked about delegation, trusting in, if we're going to be a synod and we agree to walk together, there's rules on how we walk together, not just the 10 Commandments. We've got a synodical constitution. We've got district constitutions. We've got congregational constitutions. And if you don't know what your constitution says, you probably should not be asserting strong ideas of how things should be done. and I say this because if you know how decisions are made in accord with your Constitution, then you can walk together. You can stay inside the fence, right? This is where we've agreed to work together and how we've agreed to work together. And just like I said with the communion rail, where the decisions on both sides belong to everybody. But on the outside of the rail, it's primarily so service times, weekly schedule, the things that we together do that is not word and sacrament, primarily. I've always felt that those decisions belong to the congregation, because the truth is, I've been here for 2 years. Many of these people, I have a member who's in his 90s, and he's been here longer than I've been alive.
Wow.
He retired from the Air Force like when I was a child. So, and he still gets around. He's in the choir. He's a pretty amazing guy.
Awesome.
But I'm thinking he's got a better idea of how the history of this community actually. I encouraged him to write us a book that we published for our 60th anniversary, that he dove right into. He's a historian, right? So he had great fun doing that. But on a number of occasions, I've had to help them understand, because they were used to the hair pastor model where the pastor said it and they did it. And I said, you have to understand, I'm going to give you 1 or 2 or 3 options, and you can weigh out the pros and cons of those options. And I'm not going to invest so heavily into any of these ideas that I'll be offended if you don't choose A, B, or C. I'll tell you which one's my favorite. But if you choose against it, I won't be offended. And that needs to be communicated. Or as with my associate, I'm blessed to have an associate pastor. I mean, in this day and age, that's a rarity, right? So, right. He and I both kind of got to the point where we said, look, you can choose A or B. My nose is not going to be bent. Whatever you choose to do is okay.
Yeah, nice.
And it takes a few times of saying such things for those things to sink in, and people say, oh, he actually trusts me to do that, or he trusts us to do that. And it's not because of any other reason than they came from a different idea. They came more from the ecclesial supervision having domain. And our church body had some kingdom builders that weren't building the kingdom of God. They were building their little fiefdoms. And so this church polity issue that we struggle with has gaps in it that cause such things, where somebody can come in and just kind of say, I'm in charge. And what are the parishioners going to do? I was a parishioner for 20 years. I was not afraid of my pastor, but my respect for my pastor dictated how I said and did things around him.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
I can still look back on my years before I went to seminary. My pastor in Jacksonville, Florida, wonderful man. He's still there. He's retired, but he's still there. And there were things that I would just hope he would never know about me, right? Because I didn't want his opinion of me to be sullied in a way that he didn't respect me the way I respected him, right? Yeah. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that as pastors, the level of respect and the level. Now, we know that in today's world, the position of pastor is not held as high, but I would say within our church body, even the person with the lowest opinion of pastors has a higher opinion than most Americans do of pastors.
Mm-hmm. No, agreed. Yeah. That's interesting. So, it's one of those things. I'll bring ideas to the council and whatnot, or to the church, and often I'll phrase it with, "Hey, just so you know, this is not a hill I'm going to die on. So I just want to have a conversation. And if you want to do it, awesome. If not, that's okay too. We'll move on to the next thing.
I'll cook up some new ideas."
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, they figured that out about a few of us, I'm sure. But yeah, it's one of those things where we want, and I think you kind of mentioned this earlier, we want that investment of those people who, again, this is, like you said, it's God's church, but it's also their local community church, and we want them to be invested in the process. Right. You talked about your your commanding officer being grumpy and you just did what they said. Well, we don't want people doing it that way. We want them
Right,
saying, "Oh, I
right,
want to drive this." Yeah.
right. It
So that's
needs if the activity is motivated uh, out of service, but also motivate because they derive pleasure and purpose from going through the process of loving and serving each other and loving and serving the community. Um, I think another important thing that a senior pastor or even a sole pastor needs to do is if you just let things happen without guidance, they tend to go awry. So what do I mean there? I mean, it's incumbent upon a pastor to know his people enough to know who he should ask to prayerfully consider serving in different roles, right? Um, because if you remember, I talked about, delegation doesn't relieve from responsibility. If I have asked people to do things who said they do it and it just didn't get done, right? So so here and where I served, that thing still needs to get done. So that's when you the whole, just like our Constitution and election processes, we should cultivate and encourage. I don't have to teach somebody how to be a leader who's an experienced chief operating officer of something in my community. I can know without a doubt that that person knows how to lead a meeting because they have a job that leads meetings,
right.
right? So that's the kind of person I would lean towards asking to serve as president or something along those lines, right? But somebody who has those skills but rarely attends Bible study, is sporadic in their church attendance, that's not elder material, right? An elder needs to be somebody who's every time spiritual food is being distributed, they're present.
Yeah.
Those are your best candidates for elders. So,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to kind of walk through that and live with them and know this person is very dedicated. They want to do what they can to serve, but you know what? They're only going to be here once every 3 to 6 weeks,
Mm-hmm.
and that's their habit. And as frustrating as that is for us pastors, um, who we don't have to be here once a week, have to be here every time the doors are open for some sort of spiritual teaching or preaching, right?
Right.
And during COVID, I was doing like 6 or 7 services a weekend in East Tennessee for about 6 or 8 months.
Wow.
I asked my congregation, my elders, I said, I could do because of the size of our congregation, the size of the facility, I was like, I could do 5 or 6 on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. And they said, Pastor, you can have 4 on Saturday and 4 on Sunday. So when you talk about developing, that they knew that I would work myself to death because that to me is the most important thing. And they were like, no, we don't want you to wear yourself out. You can do that, and then we'll pare back as we can. So you have to trust. I think that again, this comes from my previous background, I guess, as an elder, having pastors who would consult with the elders and take what they said to make good decisions, right? So in the same way that I want to have the congregation make good decisions based on good information, substantive information that they can ponder and say A, B, or C. In the same way, we as pastors run across difficulties in loving and serving people as the people that you see and that you think are rock solid in their lives fall apart and you hurt with them, right? You hurt with them, and at the same time, you're the doctor you're the theologian who's got to come alongside them and help them pick up the pieces, right? And yeah, that's probably the most something I learned going through doxology is just as not just PTSD, that the people who serve people who are going through disasters suffer with them, so they have a form of PTSD. It's a ministry sort of thing.
Right.
It's a sympathetic emotion thing, and I just from my previous vocation, I just was taught to tough it, put some spit on it, move on. Um,
Yeah.
but in my age and current vocation, greater attention to to my own mental and physical health will give me more. If you burn the candle at both ends, so to speak, the candle has a light that's half as long, and that's that analogy carries great truth. It doesn't matter how much natural energy you have, how energetic you are. When you hit about 30 years old, you realize that metabolism is not there forever. Right?
Yeah.
That metabolism that kept you awake is now not there, and it's
Yeah.
not burning as many calories. So you got to figure things out.
Right. Right. No, that's good. So, I mean, just a lot of good information. I just appreciate the reference to your elders in Tennessee and how they were caring for you, knowing that hey, you'll do whatever they ask, and even your idea of more services. They were like, that's
Right.
not good for you, even though
Right.
what a blessing to them to go. He really wants to serve the congregation, but
Right.
they were wise and said, let's figure this out in a different way for your
Right.
sake. And again, they understand that if you were completely tired and exhausted all the time, you're not going to be able to serve the congregation
Right.
effectively anyway.
Mhm.
So you've been in ministry, what we're looking at close to 20 years now, right? In pastoral ministry.
Yeah. I was my first year as a vicar. I had to tell people stop calling me pastor because I'm a student right now.
Yeah, yeah.
But oh 06, I served as a lay minister before I went to seminary. So I got almost 2 years of Concordia plan stuff, right?
Hmm.
Before I went to seminary. So I have 20 years with CPS, but I will be 20 years of pastor in '07 in 27.
Okay. So you spent a little bit of time in ministry. What can you tell me about a time where you just felt built up in ministry? You just someone just said something to you or did something that made you go, man, I feel good about ministry right now.
Yeah, there's a number of those, and they all kind of look the same, but at different times. I will say that a pastor never tires of hearing how good his message was that day. You know, it's not that I need my personality stroked, but I do need to know that I'm doing what God called me to do. And when you tell me, my favorite ones though, is when people tell me things that I said that helped them that I didn't say.
Oh, interesting.
I think there's some Holy Spirit stuff going on there.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
because I sat there for years as a parishioner, and you know, I was I was beeline on what the pastor was saying, and I was and it was great, and I sometimes I'm up there in the pulpit and I'm proclaiming, and I enjoy the proclamation process. It's a lot of people think that preaching and teaching are the same thing. They're two very different things. That's what we're taught, right?
Mhm.
That long gospel sermon homily has a very different purpose than teaching. Now, I prefer teaching, so so I had to I had to warm up to. I like making, for me, teaching. In the 8 years that I taught in the Navy, I went through my syllabus and my outline, and I used it the first time I taught it. And then it sat on the podium, and I walked back and forth as I taught for 8 years, two 4 year stints. And I can remember a coworker, because I had done it for 4 years in San Diego, so I was teaching on Fort Island in Hawaii, and one of my coworkers, who this was his first teaching tour, and he was like, "How do you do it?" And I said, "How do I do what?" "You walk around for 45 minutes and tell these people all this stuff, and you don't look at anything." I
Yeah.
said, "I've done it 40 times, right?
Yeah,
It's
right,
the
right.
thing. It's like telling a story." Now, some of the dynamics change a little bit, but for the most part, it's the same. And of course, what changes drastically when you shift from a teaching environment like that to a preaching environment is uh, your your subject matter is the same, but it changes every single time you get up there.
Mhm.
And so you have to, and I don't like I don't like to make my preaching formulaic. So because of my love of teaching, I like to include a lot of, uh, for for lack of a better word, sort of trivia and context that would interest me if I was sitting in on a sermon, right? So trivia, so it helps me and helps them to better understand why this word means this thing. Yeah, okay. So I'll get my seminary dollar and I'll say the Greek word and then I'll tell you what it means.
Right.
But the truth is, things get lost in translation, and it's helpful for them to see that something that you might derive from this is not actually what's being said here, and it's not that you couldn't read it and get the truth from it. I'm not saying that.
Mhm.
I'm saying is there's probably a deeper, richer meaning that you're missing, and you can draw from that deeper, richer meaning greater enthusiasm, greater comfort, so that when you go out in that crummy world that you live in, because no matter how good you have it, it's crummy.
Right, right.
It's
Yeah.
polluted with sin, your own sin and the sin of those around you. And the people I feel most sorry for is those who are either deluded or deceived into thinking that they're a good person or that they live in a good world.
Right.
Because they're always having to patch up the delusion. You
Right.
know, that person isn't really bad. They just had a bad environment. No, they're a sinner just like you
Yeah.
are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you acknowledge that other people are sinners, then unfortunately for yourself, you have to acknowledge that you are a sinner. And I was, you know, Christmas Eve is the time when you get all the visitors from everywhere, and we usually in East Tennessee we would have chairs in the narthex because our sanctuary only had 20 pews, and really fire code wise 160 would fit in the room, including the choir loft. And realistically speaking, it was pretty full at about 90 to 120 people, somewhere in there. Well, of course, we would be packed on Christmas Eve, and at least twice I picked up a bulletin that was left open on the pew after that scratched out a poor miserable sinner. They not only could they not say that, they
Hmm.
had to point out that that was bad to say that.
Huh. Interesting.
And you know what? When we do the part of liturgy, it was, where we just basically recite scripture. If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves. I mean, that's pretty clear, right? And but the old Adam doesn't like to be reminded of that.
Right.
And if he's in charge, you're in a bad place.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say you're just mean. Well, no, I'm actually sorry for you, and I want to pray for you, and I'd like to share with you that there's a better way than deceiving yourself. You can walk with a clear conscience every single day.
Right.
It is possible, not because you did anything good,
Right.
but because Jesus washed you clean.
Yeah. Yeah.
Walk in that.
Yeah. Well, at least people are paying attention. They're scratching out the bulletin,
Yeah.
I find a lot of the visitors just kind of are there and they just say, okay, when is this over so I can go
Right,
leave,
right, right, right.
so that's good.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
there's I would say the other times is when an elder or somebody just takes you aside and simply asks the question that shows concern. Pastor, how you doing?
Yeah.
You know, that these are people who are in leadership roles and they know the stress that a leader has. And, you know, make sure they see that you're a balanced person. So they know you're probably taking care of yourself, but they want you to know that they want to make sure you take care of yourself.
Mhm.
And that doesn't mean anything more than take was there's this thing kind of in the baby boom and before generation that valued working yourself to death, not just as a pastor in any vocation. I worked with guys in the Navy who the military will not let you save like more than 90 days of vacation. Once you hit 90, they're going to make you take a month off. It will say, you are going to take this month off or these 2 weeks off. go take a vacation.
Mhm.
Because even the military knows that never taking a vacation is bad for you.
Right. Yeah.
Just like you need sleep every day to drain the pollution out of your brain so that it functions, in the same way, you need. I I remember shortly after I came here, I didn't realize the stress that I was in East Tennessee, and wonderful congregation, wonderful people, but you 15 years plus, you just
Mhm.
don't even you've lived with it for so long you don't recognize it, right?
Right.
So I took a 2 week vacation shortly after I took this call and went and visit my wife's family and visit some of my favorite places right on the German-Austrian border, swim in my favorite lake. Uh, and I didn't realize till I was there for 9 days, 9 days that I hadn't thought of work once.
Mm.
Now, you would think people on vacation don't think about work. Well, you and I both know that there's people living in your head for free all the time, right? Rent free. They live
Yeah.
in there. Now, that was the first time in probably over a decade that I did not think of work for that period of time. Now, it was because I was transitioning and I was no longer carrying the burden of the previous location, and I didn't fully understand the burden of where I was yet,
Mhm.
right? So, but still, and it's helping. That's why I think that as we get older, we need more vacation to have that sort of rejuvenation. Even the benefit of sabbaticals is clearly seen. The Grace Place people will tell you that.
Mhm.
They did a Grace Place thing for us. Just all the fourth year students got a weekend up at Pokagon State Park north of Fort Wayne. That was a very pleasant experience. Just a time to relax and focus on taking good care of yourself. Really.
Yeah.
Um, so our church body does a good job of encouraging pastors to take care of themselves, and the Grace Place and doxology. I actually think that doxology should probably be a required part of like the first 10 years of pastorate. You because it is designed to help pastors and parishioners do just the same stuff you're talking about, right?
Mhm.
Taking care of pastors and to help so that they can take care of their congregation.
Right, right. Yeah, and that's some of the challenge I think as pastors, even when I can't, well, pastors being vulnerable enough too to share
Right.
that I'm not doing well. Because we're really good at presenting a certain personality, if we want to call it that, but image all the time because we want to be the good pastor, but
Right.
having those people that you have a good enough relationship to, so when they do ask you, like you said, how are you really doing? You can be like, you know what, I'm really tired right now,
Right.
or this is stressing me out. It's
Right.
funny, whenever I go on vacation, I just make sure there's Wi-Fi there because I keep working. I don't,
Yeah,
and
that's
some of
not
it
good.
is so I don't have to do more when I get back, or I spend time before doing so
That-
much so that I can feel like I can
yeah,
relax a
I
little
hear
bit,
you. Yeah.
you know.
I some of the things I've done, I so this year I've made some changes that have been very helpful. I've decided to fast from news, and I
Mm.
get most of my news via email very selectively.
Mhm.
Now I started in January. I put all those news emails directly in the trash can. It's pleasant. I might see an occasional headline that I feel like I need to know something about, but I get most of my. You can't get away from news.
Right.
It's out there. You're going to hear something. Someone's going to share it.
Mhm.
So, and I actually have I added a few more. So I'm doing along with my daily readings. I'm listening to Lutheran Hour Ministries daily Portals of Prayer daily, and I just recently got elected to a junior council position with our district LWML. So I just figured I ought to know what mustard seeds are going
Yeah.
out
Yeah.
so I can be fed the same way they're being fed and understand that.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't know, I'm gonna put a commercial out here for somebody, but I don't know if have ever heard of the Christian History Almanac. I've made that part of my daily routine about when he first started. I think he's been doing it now for 5 or 10 years.
Mm.
But it's a guy named Dan Van Voris in Southern California. He was uh, he was a professor at Concordia, and basically the 1517 basically pays him to produce this daily podcast, and it's only and he hits a piece of history for that day,
Nice.
church history,
Yeah.
which except for the times when he's a big CCM fan, so is that the Christian contemporary? He's a big CCM fan, so he likes to talk about those things, and I'm not so much a fan of that, so I don't find it as interesting. Most of his history stuff I really enjoy, so those things feed me on a daily basis, right?
Yeah. Well, that's great. So what have you found in the years of ministry to be one of the most challenging aspects of ministry?
Hmm. The most difficult thing is to not tell people stuff I know they need to hear because I know they won't hear it. If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
This person needs to hear what you're doing with, I'll do it this way, what you're doing with your parents, your children see you doing. And what you're doing with your parents is not good. So your children are probably going to do the same thing to you. They're learning it from you.
Yeah.
You know, cutting people off or being unkind, breaking the eighth commandment about your parents when they're not around, saying that the grandma or the grandpa, and it goes both ways. The fourth commandment, a lot of people don't realize the fourth commandment is not just for children obeying parents. It's for grandparents respecting their children's parental role with regard to their children.
Mm.
So follow this, if you will. It's wrong for a grandparent to sugar up their grandkids and say, now it's your problem, right? Because it's not respecting their children to say, I'm going to have fun with your kids and then you can have them. Maybe you're teaching your children and you're teaching your grandchildren that maybe it's okay to not do what mom and dad says sometimes, right? That's not helpful for your grandchildren. That's not wise. Anyway, so telling people and being kind to people that I don't want to be kind to. That text that speaks of heaping coals on their head. I've seen burning coals on people's head when I was overly kind to them because that's the only way I could talk to them without being angry.
Right. Well, how have church members then helped you meet some of that challenge that you have, those couple that you mentioned there?
Well, yeah, I keep being drawn to a particular situation that I really just can't talk about from my previous congregation, simply because the more details I give, the more clear it is who I'm speaking of. And
right.
I doubt that any of them will see this, but I just can't take that chance, right? So
that's fine.
Yeah, I will say that they help by being there. They help by asking the questions. They help by praying for me, right? I'm convinced that on more than one occasion in my life, not just as a pastor, but as a member of the body of Christ, the Lord saw fit to protect me from my idiocy or the idiocy of others because someone was praying, and it worked in His overall plan. I would say clearly God wants me in this place at this time because He could have had me at least a half dozen times in the past 30 years. He could have brought me home.
Yeah.
But we see those near misses in life and think, well, He prepared for me some work to do ahead of time that's probably still waiting for me.
Yeah. No, that's a great word, and I want to encourage any church member that's listening to this. Please pray for your pastors. Sometimes we minimize the effectiveness of prayer because we don't necessarily see the immediate result, but we don't recognize the fact that there is a spiritual battle that's going on. And if pastors can be taken out, it affects more than just the pastor and his family. It affects the whole congregation. And so really that prayer is a great piece. And let your pastor know that you're praying for them and ask them how you can pray for them. I think that just means a lot to pastors. So as we kind of wrap up, tell me how someone in your church has made you smile within the last couple of weeks.
Well, the clearest example would be I teach my Bible studies are basically through the Bible. So on Sundays, when I got here 2 years ago, we started with Genesis and we just finished Leviticus. So we got through the rough part. Numbers and Deuteronomy is not as messy as Leviticus is.
Right.
So So we're going to take a break this summer and go through some topical studies, and then we're going to pick up with and just the feedback, because I love to teach. The feedback I get in those settings is helpful and encouraging. But when I first got here, the Friday morning Bible study, they wanted to start in the New Testament. So in the 2 years I've been doing, and that one's from 10 to noon. So we get with 2 hours, you can get through 3 to 6 chapters at a time.
Yeah.
And we are in we just finished Romans. Yeah, we just finished Romans, getting ready to go into Hebrews. And um it's really no, Hebrews is on the other end. Whatever's after Romans, I don't know.
First
Anyway,
Corinthians.
yeah, so yeah, we I have how do I say this? It's so encouraging, it makes me smile. And I want to say it in a way that is encouraging to the person that gave me the encouraging words, right? So um sometimes help comes from unexpected places to make you smile or make you encouraged, right? So I I have if everybody's there, I got about 16 or 17 people who make the 10 to noon Friday.
Wow.
And um on more than one occasion, a particular individual has told me how much they appreciate their Friday morning Bible study. And that's just helpful to me. It gives purpose to what I do. And it's not just a time of Bible study and learning, while it is mostly that. It's also a time when these people visit and they talk. I mean, we usually don't start. It's 2 hours long, but we only got about an hour and a half of actual teaching time. And
Yeah.
if you withdraw the rabbit holes that I get into, it's probably about an hour, because one thought brings forth another thought.
Right.
This is what happens to pastors, right? You've
Mm.
asked me questions, and then we went down a little path, and
Mhm.
we're like, oh, let's come back to the sheet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's appropriate times for that, though, is that. So, yeah, I
Yeah.
think, that feedback is so important because, again, we're doing this. We have a sacred calling. We want to make a difference for the kingdom of God and for the lives of those who God has entrusted to us. And so when we hear that is actually happening, it just makes us go, "Thank you, Lord,"
Yeah.
because I want to make sure I'm doing what you have called me to do. And so God uses the body together to help us with that. So what's the ultimate desire for your people at your church?
I think that my desire as a pastor is not probably different than the desire of most real pastors. I say real pastors because you and I both know that there's people who get into this role because they want to have their ego stroked or they want to be famous or whatever. Um, I will say that all pastors probably struggle with that aspect of it. Who wouldn't like to be famous, right? But in order to be famous, you have to be novel. And then some theologian said something along the lines of being novel means you're probably a heretic, right? Because
Yeah.
if you're doing something that's new, then is it departing from the truth, right? Anyway, um, that being said, I desire for this congregation the same thing I've desired for every congregation I've been a part of. Um, First and foremost, that they would be regularly nourished to live out the lives that God has called them to live. Um, when we talk about church growth, there's two kinds. Uh, I think the numerical one is secondary. Uh, I think that growth of the spiritual well-being of a congregation, before they can grow numerically, they have to be healthy. Nobody wants to become part of a dysfunctional group of people. Now, this does not imply that any group of people is ever fully functional, right?
Good
We
point.
are all at some level dysfunctional. But if I am excited about going to my church and hearing God's word preached and receiving the sacraments and being with the people there because I love them, then it's easier for me to invite someone to that than I'm afraid that crazy Uncle Fred's going to talk to them and they're not going to want to come back. And, all these self defeatist things. So it's important, most important to me, that I can be part of making this a healthy, thriving group of people who can love and share the gospel in this community. Because I think that God puts churches in places on purpose. We're in a center of a population that He's called us to serve. There's not a lot of Lutherans here in Northwest Louisiana, but you know, here we are. And I would hope that I help them feel comfortable the fact that, you know what, all of your Trinitarian Christian friends who are not Missouri Synod Lutherans, they're Christians just like you are. However, the differences are important, and to say they're not is dishonest.
Right.
So we don't just avoid them and say they're not there. We say, you know, I have Baptist family members, I have Baptist friends who would agree with everything we confess in the creed. So we're on the same page, right?
Right.
We won't say the same thing about baptism or the Lord's Supper. Those are very important things. And I think that it's sad for those who don't have them, right? Because they nourish us and nurture our spiritually. But that doesn't mean that they're not part of us, right?
Right.
And that's the other sort of strange thing. They can feel comfortable in that and not feel that when I talk about people inviting people to church, say the people you should be inviting to church, the first question you should ask a friend or neighbor, do you go to church? Yes, where? If they're going to a Bible-believing Trinitarian Christian church, don't ask them to skip their church to come to yours. Besides, 75% of your neighbors don't go to church.
Right.
Maybe invite some of them.
Yeah.
Right. So, oh, I don't go to church. Okay, why don't you go to church? They would be surprised that a lot of people actually are willing to talk about Jesus and faith. So that would be and if they don't worry about having the answers, you have an expert that you can call.
Yeah.
Bring them to church so they can talk to the expert.
Right. Right.
Yeah. And sit alongside them, because our liturgical worship, is a little different than most Protestants. I say most Methodists, and there's liturgical Baptists now, so a lot of it would be familiar to a lot of them. But truth is, sit next to them and help them understand what's going on. And if you can't explain it to them, maybe you should learn yourself.
we need to have a meeting with the pastor, all of us. So yeah, no, that's good stuff. So if someone wanted to listen to this, they're like, man, I just want to listen to more of Pastor Robert. How would they check you out? At what's website or a Facebook page or something? What do you have?
I have a Facebook page. Our church has 2 Facebook pages, and our church has a web page, ilcbossier.net, but it's still going through some. It's functional.
Okay.
It's connected to Unite 360, but I don't have the web skills that I learned to build the site where I came from. And I don't have time to relearn those things to build them here. So I'm in the process of getting someone to do that. Mm-hmm. However, on our webpage, and we have a YouTube channel. We live stream our services on Sunday, and then once they're live streamed, they're available. So anybody could, if they want to see, that guy talks funny. Maybe he preaches funny too. But this church was streaming services before COVID, mm-hmm. So they have the people and the resources to do that well, and so that at least that part of our online presence is robust.
Great. I'll put that link in the notes below in the comments, so people can click on it and check it out if they need to. And especially if you're in the area and you hear this somehow by God getting in front of you, there's a great church that you can go to if you're not going to a Bible-believing Trinitarian church already. Just we want to clarify that. All right, Robert, it's always a pleasure to talk with you. I just appreciate your depth of knowledge, your heart for the people, and just your love for Christ. And so together, though, as we build one another up in love, we can help the church flourish. So thanks so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for what you do.
All right, my friend. Bless you. Thanks.